Well, good morning. Welcome back. Welcome to the first time to a series we're in. We started last week over Easter, this idea of redefining empty. And this idea of we look at empty as a bad thing, but thinking about Easter, empty is a good thing. And maybe the emptiness that we sometimes experience that we hate maybe isn't such a bad thing after all, because of the possibilities. And I told you last week that I hate being empty. I'm not going to ask you to raise your hands, but if you've ever had the joy of handing your credit card to somebody, then them coming back to where you're sitting, maybe at a nice romantic dinner, and they look at you and they say, "I'm sorry, but your credit card is not working." And in a moment, your mind goes to this idea of, oh, it's overdrawn, I didn't pay the bills, I wonder what's going on. And you come up with some kind of story, that empty feeling. Well, you've come home after a long day, and you're just looking for some comfort food, and you open the freezer, you grab that last little bit of Ben & Jerry's, and you discover that somebody else has eaten it already. And we've all had that experience of being empty. But worse than being empty, worse than the reality, the truth that the bank account's empty, the relationship's empty, the refrigerator's empty, seems like my life is empty, is the feeling that goes along with it. Because let's be honest, most of us are driven by our feelings more than we are truth. Kind of how we're wired, kind of how we experience life. And there's something about this feeling of emptiness, that I have nothing. And it sometimes plays out in this whole idea, and I think in your bulletin we've written it there, this idea of emptiness and the frustration over a religious experience that just isn't what it should be. And I always kind of laugh at that, because who says what a religious experience ought to be, what it should be? I've yet to find something in the Bible, the 5 list of what it should be. These are the things that we pick up pieces in it. But normally our experience of what it should be is based on what we feel and what we see. In fact, that's really our first point here, that we have a feel problem. And that's true. I have one. I'm guessing you probably have one too. When I feel empty, I don't feel good. And when I don't feel good, I begin to think and connect things and go around. And it looks like that little squiggly thing there. And especially in our religious experience. Sometimes we hear these people that talk about, you give your life to Jesus, and it's going to be wonderful. It's going to be great. It's just like this upward trajectory. And when your life takes a dip at some point, you begin to think, this isn't what I thought it was, and can't be something the matter with anything else. It's got to be something with me, right? Because it's supposed to go up. It's not supposed to look like that little squiggly line, go up and down and all around, even though that's been my experience, and I'm guessing that for everybody sitting here, that's been your experience as well. But we can't admit it, we can't accept it, because we've heard that it ought to be going up. And so we do a lot of things. We fake it until we make it. Happy Sabbath. Happy Sabbath, By the way, I'll repeat it again if you didn't get it the first time, because some of you didn't get it the first time. I hate Happy Sabbath. I like a Happy Sabbath, but I hate the whole thing with Happy Sabbath, Happy Sabbath. It just becomes it's like saying, how you doing? And everybody says, yeah, right? We don't know everybody's fine, but we say it because it's just polite. It kind of glosses over. It's this idea of faking it. And sometimes in our religious experience, our walk with God, we say, I'm just going to fake it until I make it. I've heard, just kind of keep, going, doing the stuff, and maybe at some point it'll become reality. And what I've experienced is that the more you fake it, you really make it the fake it part. And it becomes so easy just to become fake it stuff. Because that's what it's supposed to look like. That's what it's supposed to be. And so we fake it. We also chase our tails. It's not kind of working, and we think, well, I'll just keep doing the same stuff. Because if I keep doing the same stuff, at some point, it's going to click for me. You ever watch a dog chase its tail? I don't know about you, when I see a dog chase its tail, I think, what a stupid animal. Especially these dogs that just go around and around and around and around and around and around and around. Stop, get a drink of water, and around and around. You're just like, but we do it, right? We just kind of keep doing the same stuff because we think we've heard it work for somebody else, so we're going to do it ourselves. And if we don't do that, we go following rainbows. We heard something great's happening over here, so we go over there because I want to be in the great stuff. We heard about this book or this seminar or this song or this message, and we follow all this kind of stuff. And we look at other people and we hear about their experience. The person that seemed like just every day, they'll talk about every day God speaks to me. Every day is a new discovery, and I fall deeper and deeper love with Jesus every day because my experience with him just grows and grows and grows and grows. And if you're one of those people, you need to know something. We hate you. Because we don't believe it's true, because we haven't experienced it, and when we talk to other people who think they've experienced it, we talk behind closed doors. That isn't how it is, but it puts this picture, and we follow those rainbows because we have this feeling problem, and we want to feel better. Like we said last week, we want to feel better quick, and so tell me the rainbow, because I want to discover the pot at the end. Or we simply back away slowly. We just kind of fade into the distance because it's just not working, and I'm just going to step away from it all. The reality is we're empty. And just like we tried to do last week, we're going to try to do again today and for the next couple of weeks. So I want to redefine that idea of emptiness in your life. And to help you maybe discover that emptiness isn't such a bad thing. That maybe it's a thing that God wants you to have, because when we're empty, we know we need to be filled, right? And if I always feel like I'm filled, then I never really feel like I'm empty, which means I really don't have much need. I want you to listen to this. This may be the only thing worth coming for today, so listen to this one, all right? It's when our lives are shaken, when they're rattled, that we become most aware of what they contain. Isn't that true in your life? And sometimes we believe we have faith until something happens in our life. Something gets shaken up, something gets rattled, and that's when we discover what they really contain. And let me ask you a question. Would it be better to discover today that my faith isn't as solid as I thought it was? Or would it be better to wait until, let's say, Jesus is coming back, and discover, oh no, when I shake it, there's nothing there. Emptiness may not be such a bad thing. It's when our lives are shaken, when they're rattled, that we become most aware of what they contain. And I'm going to prove that to you in just a moment. Not in a feeling way, but in a fact way. But before we go any farther, I want to invite you just to pray. Let's pray one more time together, all right? Lord, we don't hold anything back from you at this moment, because it's just between you and us right at this moment. And you already know everything that goes on in our lives. You know when we have faked it. You know when we just have done the same thing over and over and over and over again and worked ourselves into a rut. You know when we've chased these rainbows, looking for that fix, that excitement, that something to infuse some life into ourselves. And you know the times that we have backed away, because nothing is hidden from you. But I'm thankful to again remind myself today that in spite of all those things, you have never moved. That you are always constant, consistent, steady, faithful, and always, always there. And your attitude towards me is not changed by any of those feelings. And I'm amazed by that. I'm amazed that you love me. That you like me. That you desire nothing but the best for me. That your hopes and desires for me is the same for all of us. That we would trust you. That we would trust you. So today I just pray that you would work in my own life to the emptiness I experience at times. And remind me again that maybe emptiness isn't such a bad thing. So I just pray you use this time to convince me of that now. In your name, amen. James chapter 1. James is the brother of Jesus. He writes this letter, and this letter goes out. And at the very beginning, this is what he writes. When you have many kinds of troubles, trials in your life, you should consider it joy. Now, I have to imagine that the first time this letter got passed around and somebody's reading it out loud, and they get to this part, somebody says, give me that thing you can't read. Because surely, when you have lots of troubles in your life, you shouldn't consider it joy. He's got to consider it something else, meaningful, valuable, a lesson for life. But he says, consider it joy. Now, I don't know if you ever wrestled with that idea, but that doesn't quite make sense to me. I mean, that's not how I feel about things. When I run into a trial, when I run into troubles, I want to get them past as quick as possible. Then I can be joyful, right? Somebody gets healed. I can be joyful then. You know, the court case doesn't get tried. I can be joyful then. But in the midst of it all, I'm supposed to be joyful. But James, as he writes this letter, and right at the very beginning, he says, you need to understand, keep reading. And so, when you have all these troubles and trials, you should consider it joy because you know that these troubles test your faith. They show you about your faith. You discover whether I really have faith or not so much. And this testing of our faith will give you perseverance, the idea of endurance. You know, the only way you can get perseverance and endurance is by persevering and enduring. I know it's a shock, but that's really how it works. I don't know how many of you belong to a health club or a gym. If you do, you probably joined in January of some year. They pack them in with the specials, right? You go to the gym and you say, man, I need to lose a few pounds. I need to get bigger muscles. I need to get stronger, get some more endurance. So I'm going to go join a gym. And you join a gym and you feel good about it. Because I belong to a gym. That's right. I even got tennis shoes, you know. I got the gym shorts, the towel, you got the little bag, you know. Ladies, you're all color coordinated. Everything's cool, you know. And then it hits you. That having that contract, that in some cases goes on forever and ever and ever, doesn't help you accomplish anything. That you actually have to get in and sweat. You got to get in and push hard. You got to get in and exert yourself. You got to get in and face some troubles and some trials in order to develop those things. And isn't it amazing that we recognize that, how funny that and crazy that it seems like in life, that people would join, but there are hundreds of thousands of people in the United States of America that have gym memberships, that pay on a monthly basis, that never step foot in the gym. But they feel good about it. Because I have a gym membership, which means I have the possibility, if I so choose, to do something with it. And James says, listen, you know, we get wound up in trials and troubles and we want to out of them as quick as possible. James says we need to kind of broaden our view. You know, you get in those things, you feel empty because you're saying this is not working right. And he's saying, hold it here. Don't forget that it's in the very midst of those things. It gives you perseverance. It helps you get endurance. That helps you test your faith so it gets stronger, so your faith really becomes the kind of faith you think you have, or maybe you hope you want to have, but maybe you don't have because it hasn't been tested. Let your perseverance, this endurance, finish its work, have its full effect. And to have its full effect means I need to go to the gym not just once a month. I probably need to go a few times a week in order to get the full effect, so that it can have its full effect. Lori and I belong to a gym called, this is not a plug, by the way, so don't get anybody mad at me, Planet Fitness. The ungym, you know, the gym for the rest of us, you know. They serve pizza once a month, Tootsie Rolls anytime you want them. I mean, it's kind of foolish when you think about the whole thing. They found their niche and they got their sales point, and it's an okay place. But the whole pitch is that, you can work out, but you don't have to be that serious about it. Which, if you've ever been there and looked around, you recognize they've accomplished what they wanted to. It's crowded. People are walking on the treadmills, watching Sports Center. Man, towel off. Whew. Feeling good today, you go home. And it's just crazy how that all kind of... But James says, listen, you got to let your perseverance, you got to let that trials and testing work. Got to give it some time, because what it does is it toughens you up. It strengthens you up. And through it, you got to let it finish its work and have its full effect. Then, he says, you will be mature and whole and lacking nothing. But you're not going to get there overnight. You don't get there by simply going down and signing up at the gym. You got to put in time and energy and effort and years. You got to make some changes. But it's all part of that package. I want you to write this down. What begins at the moment of your salvation isn't completed in that same moment. Now, some of you already knew that. Because you look at your life and say, yeah, I thought, come to Jesus, and the Bible talks about being a new creation, I'm brand new, all this stuff is beyond. How come it's not quite that way? And sometimes we forget that what began at the moment of your salvation isn't completed at that same moment. And the Bible talks about that. These two huge theological words, justification and sanctification, which simply means at the moment of your salvation, you are justified before God. You are considered A-OK. A little smiley face gets put on your record, I think. A little star in the corner, And then sanctification is just the process of God working in your life to get you not to be more justified, but to get you to become a clearer and clearer picture of what it is to be a follower of His. And we know that, but we don't always believe it, because we hear sometimes other people, what they say about what ought to happen. I'm a new creation, all this kind of stuff. And maybe a simplistic way is simply to say, you've invited God into your life. Maybe you invited Jesus into your heart, but maybe you just haven't given Him access to all the rooms yet. It's probably why you are happy to be forgiven before Him, but aren't so forgiving all the time to other people. It's why you're thrilled when something really goes good for you and you got a great success, but when somebody else has that great success, yeah, woo, good for you. You're kind of, it's not. It's just a reminder that this doesn't just happen in a moment. This process has one writer said, the work of a lifetime. And so often we want that work to happen right now. Because I don't like how I feel. I don't like to have to go through this stuff. I just want everything fixed right now. I want everything to be brand new. Listen, you are still a work in progress. Thank you. I'm glad somebody said amen. You are still a work in progress. Amen. And that's okay. And we need to be convinced of that. For something we get caught up in this idea, I don't want to feel down, I don't want to feel empty, I don't want to feel like I'm not on track. And the reality is, everybody feels that way at some point. And what I love about the Bible is that over and over, it's a story. Multiple stories of God working in people's lives and people trying to figure out what it means to follow God. And multiple times you see these people up, and they're down, up, and they're down, Which ought to tell us something. It should tell us not what we sometimes pick up, in Christian circles about, if you're devoted to God, everything will be this way and this way and this way, and everything will be perfect. But you still work. And that's okay. James, this time in the Voice, same passage you just looked at. Voice is a newer translation, actually the latest one out, and it kind of puts in a little more moving commentary. But it says there, listen, don't run from tests and hardships as much as we want to. Don't run from tests and hardships. As difficult as they are, you will ultimately find joy in them if you embrace them. You'll find joy if you embrace them. Your faith will blossom under pressure and teach you true patience as you endure. And true patience brought on by endurance will equip you to complete the long journey and cross the finish line. Mature, complete, and wanting nothing. I love how it kind of captures that. Because that's really God's desire for us, is to recognize this is a process. And in that process, you're not always going to be way at the top. In reality, you ought to be thankful for those moments you're at the top. Because most of life, for the vast majority of us, are somewhere in the middle. We're kind of average. Thus, the reason they call it, right? But we don't want to be average. We hear these stories, we get tied up in, oh, we ought to be up here. Why is it like this? And maybe it's like this because your faith is being grown and stretched and endured for you to understand the bigger picture of it all. Over in Philippians, Paul, in writing his letter, says this: work out, back to that idea again, work out your own salvation. Often, haven't been a Christian my whole life, but the major portion of my life now, I can't tell you how many times I've heard this passage talked about, and how it's been translated, how it's been applied is, you need to work on your salvation. You need to work for your salvation. You need to prove something out of it all. And I want you to say, if you've ever heard that, they were lying to you. Because it doesn't say work on or work for, it says work out your soul and salvation with reverence and awe and trembling. And I love how Amplified Version, this idea of self-distrust, that empty feeling, that maybe I can't give it like I need to give it. Again, that's not a bad place, that's a good place, at least according to Paul here. And this idea of working out simply means to do that from which something results. If you go to the gym and work out, your idea is you're doing something from which some results are going to come from it, right? If you go sit at the bar and do your curls there, you are working out, doing something which some results will come, right? It all works. It's an application of life. And Paul is saying to us, listen, you need to work out your salvation. Not to work on it, you are at the point of salvation. But it's now it's working out, figuring it out, experiencing it out, letting it come by. Not in your own strength, for it's God who is all the while effectively at work in you. See, if you're not progressing fast enough, it may not all be your fault. It may be God's fault, correct? Nobody wants to say correct in that, do you? But that's what it says, isn't it? It is God who all the while effectively at work in you. And maybe you're a little more anxious than God is because He knows that some time will do you much greater benefit than some shortness of accomplishment. So maybe it's not all your fault. Okay, yeah. But it may be, but we'll get that later. But God's at work both to will and to work for His good pleasure and satisfaction and delight. And God is not working in your life in order to bring satisfaction to Him. He loves to see us go through those experiences, not because of the pain it brings us, but the experience that through enduring those things, through experiencing those things, through hanging into this, through the questions and doubts and all that kind of stuff, that we gets us to the place where we trust Him. Trust Him, not for the things He does, but to trust Him simply because of who He is. Then Paul finishes it by saying this: do all things, all this letting God work out of your salvation, all this kind of wrestling with this, what does this mean? Do all these things without grumbling and fault-finding and complaining against God. Not that anybody in this room would ever do that kind of thing. But he says do it without all the complaining. You know, where are you at, God? How come you let me happen to me? Why are you doing this? Because that's all where all of us go. You know, we buy in this idea that good things happen to good people. And thus, when something bad happens to me, I must not be a good person, that God's punishing me through this whole thing. But do all this without grumbling and fault-finding and complaining against God, and without questioning and doubting among yourselves. Which is kind of hard to do, if we're honest. And in fact, at the start, when he said to let this work out with this attitude of self-distrust, it may not be a bad thing to have a little self-distrust in the whole thing. Listen, God's acceptance of you is not based on your performance. Though everything in your life has told you that acceptance of you is based on your performance. We have a whole row of people back here from California out on a trip to Washington, D.C. to see all the historical sites. But every one of those kids, your acceptance is based on performance, isn't it? You know exactly what I'm talking about. Your parents, if they're good parents, have set a bar. You get below this, this is what happens, right? You get above this, this is what happens. Your teachers, 3 of them sitting here today, grade you based on your... That's right. At your job. Your acceptance is based on your performance, right? Why you still have a job is because you've apparently been performing, right? Everything in life seems to be funneled through this, that my acceptance is based on my performance. My experience, my acceptance here as your pastor is based on my performance. That's true. If I got up here every week and fumbled around, if I was spending all the money on bad stuff, if I was doing bad stuff, you all would say, I don't think so. You are no longer accepted here. At least as our pastor. We'll let you be a member, but you're not being our pastor, right? Which is fine. I understand that. But we need to understand our life experience is not the same as our experience with God. Because God's acceptance of you is not based on your performance. Never has been, never will be. And we need to be convinced of that. Because somewhere out there we get this idea, well, yeah, but God has saved me, but now kind of got to get my act together. Got to change stuff. Let me ask you just a few questions. I wrote these down so I didn't mess them up. What makes you think you have to turn your life around before you can commit your life to God? Life's experiences, right? What makes you think you have to impress God with your obedience before He will impart His grace to you? What makes you think you have to do things to get God to like you, much less love you? What makes you think you have to be perfect? The perfect parent, the perfect student, the perfect spouse, the perfect employee, the perfect whatever. What makes you think you have to be perfect before God will perfectly love you? So I told you this a few weeks ago. Believing in Jesus, having faith in Jesus, trusting Jesus is not a prerequisite to being a follower of Jesus. None of His first disciples believed Him, trusted Him fully, had complete faith in Him. For the whole 3.5 years, they had moments. But Jesus simply said, come on, follow me. And they followed Him. They didn't know where they were going. They didn't have the moment to say, oh, by the way, guys, the Messiah's called me, baby. Check me out, With the Messiah here, we're all set, This is, I trust Him completely, They kept saying, why are you doing this? What's happening here? You can't do that. How come that? Why? And we get caught up in saying, you got to have all this kind of stuff when Jesus says, it's not about all that kind of stuff. It's simply about saying, follow me. Let's go on a walk together and see where this all leads us. See, a lot of us spend a lifetime trying to achieve something that Jesus has already achieved for us. If I could, I will, but we get lost in the whole thing. All right, let me walk you through just a couple things to close today. Things I want you to help kind of shift your attitude towards this whole thing. First of all, I want you to rethink your outlook. The reason we struggle is because we compare our worst days with everyone else's top 10. Isn't that true? You're having a bad day and somebody else is telling you how good a day they have. Maybe the best day they've ever had, but you don't hear that. You just hear good, bad, right? Oh yeah, my thing got messed up. Okay, Romans. Paul writes this in don't copy the behavior and customs of this world. And you know what one of the behaviors and customs of this world is? Comparing ourselves to others. We used to call it keeping up with the Joneses. I don't know what they call it now. It's overspending, overstretching, overscheduling, over this, over that. Because why? Because that's what we do. We got to be filled with everything. And so many of us are sucked into the behaviors and customs of this world that we want to be filled with everything. Filled, we vacation here and filled with our schedules, and we got this practice and that practice, and we're doing this and we're volunteer there, and we got all this, and we think doing all that stuff is going to fill us up. And somewhere in the midst of all that fullness, we discover we're still very empty. But now we're stressed out on top of empty. So don't copy the behavior and customs of this world, but let God transform you into a new person by changing the way you think. And I'm becoming more and more convinced that your issue and my issue revolves more around how I think about things, how I process things, how I see them because of how I connect the dots, than it has to do anything with the way I've heard or want things to be. Let God transform you. Then he says, you will learn to know God's will for you. See, the biggest mistake we make when dealing with difficult feelings is accepting them as true. Isn't that true? Think of the difficult, the feelings that come along, that you're not worthy, not smart enough or bright enough, hardworking enough, this enough, that enough. And you take those things, and what do? We believe they're true. Because we go on feelings more than we do on facts and reality. And one of the changes I think we often do is go back to say, what does God say about this? And God says you are worthy. And you know how God proves it to you? It's because none of us are worthy. But because none of us are worthy, and the fact that Jesus died for every one of us, changes it from just being somebody who makes us worthy to somebody who says, you're worthy even though you aren't worthy because I made you worthy. And because he made us worthy, that's a truth. And all this other stuff, we have to say, is that really a true statement? Is that really the positive of all that stuff? See, God is able to take the mess of our past, the trials, the troubles, and turn them into a story worth sharing. He is able to work in your life and in my life and take all the craziness and somehow bring something good out of it. Secondly, I encourage you to cooperate. To cooperate with whatever God is trying to do in your life. See, you can't control everything, you can't fix everything, but you can cooperate with God. Now, I don't know how many of you have ever had the joy of having children and getting close to bedtime. And you tell your kids, or even when you were a kid, you know how this works. You tell your kids it's time for bed, and they say, I'm not tired, I'm not sleepy. Which may be a true statement, right? But as a good parent, you say, I don't care. It's bedtime, right? And so what we try to teach our kids is that it's not a fact of whether you're tired or not. I'm not going to say, yes, you are tired. But it's about cooperating. We're trying to get on a schedule here. I'm asking you to cooperate with me. And how we're going to cooperate, you're going to go brush your teeth in the next 5 minutes. Timeline on it. You're going to get in bed. I'll come down. We'll kiss you. We'll pray with you. Maybe we'll read a story, whatever. Then there's this moment we're going to turn the lights off. It's going to be a nice soft bed. Be nice and quiet. And your job is simply to cooperate. You can't, you can't force somebody to sleep, right? I mean, because some of you sitting here today know what it's like to go, I got to go to sleep. Oh man, it's that time, I got to go to sleep. You can't force yourself, but you can put yourself in a place where the possibility is there to happen. And that's what I'm asking you when I talk about cooperating. Put yourself in the possibility, get the soft bed, turn out the lights, get the quietness, listen to a sermon, not one of mine, but somebody else's, and get yourself, cooperate with the possibilities. And that's what I'm going to ask you to do as we close today, is simply to cooperate with the possibilities. And here's my challenge. I'm going to invite you to pray every day. Oh, forget that. There it is. I'm going to invite you to spend 5 more minutes with God every day than you currently are. That's how you can cooperate. You can't force this. You say, well, Mike, my life's kind of spiritually empty. Give God 5 minutes. 5 minutes more. Which means if you're spending about 15 minutes a day with them, means you're going to spend 20. Good job. If you're spending 30 minutes, it means you're going to spend 35. If you're spending 0, you're going to spend 5. See, everybody gets it in a chance. But a way to cooperate with God, a way to be empty before God and allow God to work in life is to give him a little bit of space. And that's my challenge for you. Do the possible 5 minutes more each day. And allow God to do the impossible in your life.